1944, Nazi-occupied France. The Allied invasion of Normandy had succeeded, but German forces were still powerful. Wehrmacht divisions were positioned across France, ready to counterattack American advances. But the Germans had a problem. Their intelligence reported massive American tank divisions appearing and disappearing across multiple locations. Entire armored units would be spotted in one area, then vanish overnight, only to reappear 50 miles away. German commanders were confused. How were the Americans moving so many tanks so quickly? The answer was impossible to believe. The Americans weren't moving real tanks. They were using fake ones, inflatable rubber tanks that looked real from the air, sound trucks that mimicked the noise of armored divisions, radio operators broadcasting fake communications, and artists, professional artists, painting shadows and details to make the deception perfect. This was the Ghost Army, the most bizarre military unit in World War II, and it fooled Hitler's forces over 20 times. January 1943, the Pentagon, Washington, D.C. American military planners were studying a problem. How do you deceive an enemy that has aerial reconnaissance? How do you make them think you have more forces than you actually do? The British had used camouflage and deception successfully in North Africa. Fake tanks, dummy artillery. It worked. German reconnaissance planes would photograph British positions and report massive forces, when in reality, most were inflatable decoys. The Americans wanted to take this further, much further. The US Army began recruiting an unusual type of soldier. Artists, fashion designers, painters, sculptors, sound engineers, radio operators, anyone with creative skills. The recruitment was secret. The advertisements were vague. Special duties requiring artistic skills, classified assignment, top secret clearance required. Over 100 men volunteered. They came from art schools, advertising agencies, Hollywood studios, Broadway theaters. They were painters who could replicate shadows, sound engineers who could mix audio tracks, fashion designers who understood how fabric moved in wind. These men became the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops. Officially, it was a military unit like any other. Unofficially, it was called the Ghost Army. The recruits underwent basic military training. They learned to shoot, to march, to follow orders. But their real training was in deception. They learned how to inflate rubber tanks using air compressors, how to position fake artillery to look realistic from aerial photography, how to paint shadows that matched the sun's angle, how to broadcast fake radio transmissions that German intelligence would intercept. One recruit, Private Arthur Shilstone, a professional illustrator, later said, "We were taught to lie with art, to make fiction look like reality, to trick trained German intelligence officers into believing our illusions were real. It was the strangest military training imaginable." The Ghost Army's equipment was equally bizarre. More inflatable rubber tanks, weighing 100 pounds each, inflatable in 15 minutes, inflatable artillery pieces, realistic down to the gun barrel details, inflatable trucks and jeeps, sound trucks equipped with massive speakers, audio recordings of tank engines, troop movements, construction sounds, radio equipment for broadcasting fake communications, paint, canvas, wood for building fake structures. The total cost, approximately $1.5 million, a fraction of what real tanks would cost, but potentially as effective if the deception worked. June 1944, 2 weeks after D-Day, the Ghost Army received its first mission. The American 2nd Armored Division was being moved from one sector to another. This would leave a gap in Allied lines. If Germans discovered the gap, they could launch a counterattack. The Ghost Army's job, make the Germans think the 2nd Armored Division was still in position. At night, Ghost Army soldiers moved into the 2nd Armored Division's former positions. They brought trucks loaded with deflated rubber tanks. Within hours, they inflated over 600 fake tanks. Each one looked identical to a real M4 Sherman tank from the air. But inflating tanks wasn't enough. They needed to make the fake division look active. Artists crawled under the inflatable tanks with paint and brushes. They painted shadows that matched the sun's angle. They added mud stains, wear marks, details that would make German aerial reconnaissance photos show realistic tanks. Other soldiers created fake tire tracks using special equipment. The tracks led from the tanks to fake command posts. Everything had to look authentic. Sound trucks positioned themselves around the fake division. At night, when sound carries farther, they played recordings through massive speakers. The recordings included tank engines starting and idling, tracked vehicles moving, radio chatter, construction sounds, hammering, sawing, soldiers shouting orders. German listening posts 3 miles away recorded the sounds. Their reports stated, American Armored Division active in Sector 7, significant vehicle movement, approximately 400 to 600 tanks estimated. Radio operators broadcast fake communications. They mimicked the communication patterns of the real 2nd Armored Division, used call signs, discussed fake operations, reported fake logistics. German intelligence intercepted these transmissions. They used the radio traffic to confirm their aerial reconnaissance reports. The 2nd Armored Division was still in position. Except it wasn't. The real division was 50 miles away, preparing for an actual attack. The Ghost Army had successfully deceived German intelligence. For 6 days, the Ghost Army maintained the deception. German planes photographed the fake positions. German intelligence analyzed the photos. Their conclusion, massive American armored force present in Sector 7. German command allocated defensive forces to counter this threat. Resources that should have been used elsewhere, all because of inflatable tanks and sound effects. The first mission was a complete success. March 1945. The Rhine River, Germany. The Americans planned to cross the Rhine River, the last major natural barrier before entering Germany's heartland. But German forces were heavily defending all crossing points. The Americans needed a diversion, something that would draw German attention away from the real crossing point. The Ghost Army was given its most ambitious mission yet. The Ghost Army was ordered to create a fake 30,000-soldier division, preparing to cross the Rhine at Viersen, 30 miles north of the real crossing point. This wasn't just inflatable tanks. This was an entire fake army, complete with fake encampments, hundreds of tents, fake artillery positions, inflatable howitzers, fake supply depots, painted canvas structures, fake command posts with radio antennas, fake troop movements, sound effects and radio chatter. The Ghost Army worked for 72 hours straight. They created a fake division that looked real from German observation posts across the Rhine. Artists painted signs, 30th Infantry Division, Bridge Engineering Battalion, Quartermaster Supply Depot. Everything had to look authentic. They even created fake traffic jams. Trucks would drive in circles, creating dust and noise. The same 20 trucks would pass German observation posts repeatedly, making it look like hundreds of vehicles were arriving. Sound trucks played recordings of bridge construction, hammering, sawing, welding sounds, everything you'd hear if engineers were actually building a river crossing. German observers watched the fake division assemble. They reported to command, Americans preparing major crossing at Viersen, estimated 30,000 troops, artillery support, engineering battalions, attack imminent. German command responded exactly as hoped. They moved 2 panzer divisions to defend Viersen. Artillery was positioned to fire on the crossing point. Infantry units dug defensive positions. Thousands of German soldiers were now defending against an army that didn't exist. Meanwhile, 30 miles south, the real American 9th Armored Division crossed the Rhine with minimal opposition. The Germans had been completely deceived. The Ghost Army's fake division at Viersen held German attention for 5 crucial days. By the time German command realized it was a deception, American forces had established a solid bridgehead across the Rhine. The operation saved an estimated 10,000, 30,000 American lives, because German defenders were in the wrong place, defending against fake threats instead of real ones. How did the Ghost Army make their deceptions so convincing? The answer was in the details. Inflatable tanks. Each inflatable tank was made of rubber and canvas. When deflated, it fit in a duffel bag weighing 100 pounds. 2 soldiers could carry it. When inflated using air compressors, it became a full-size replica of an M4 Sherman tank. The tanks included realistic details. Painted camouflage patterns, track marks molded into the rubber, gun barrels that could be positioned at different angles, details like tow cables, periscopes, hatches. But the real magic was in the painting. Artists would study how light fell on real tanks, how shadows formed, how dust and mud accumulated. They replicated these details on inflatable tanks. From 5,000 feet up, the altitude German reconnaissance planes flew at, the fake tanks were indistinguishable from real ones. Sound effects. The Ghost Army's sonic deception unit was revolutionary. They recorded actual military sounds. Sherman tank engines, different sounds for starting, idling, moving, half-track vehicles, truck convoys, artillery being loaded and fired, construction equipment. These recordings were played through speakers capable of projecting sound over 3 miles. The speakers were positioned to create realistic sound patterns, as if actual military activities were happening. Radio deception. Perhaps the most sophisticated element, radio operators would study how real military units communicated. They learned call signs and code words. Communication patterns, how often units checked in, terminology and procedures, encryption methods. Then they'd broadcast fake communications that mimicked real units. German intelligence listening posts would intercept these transmissions and use them to track American unit movements that were entirely fictional, physical details. Nothing was overlooked. Soldiers created fake tire tracks and tank tread marks, laundry hanging on lines suggesting troops were encamped, garbage dumps, old ration cans, newspapers, worn paths between tents from repeated foot traffic, even fake cigarette butts near guard posts. German intelligence analyzed all these details in reconnaissance photos. Every detail confirmed the deception. The Ghost Army's missions weren't always smooth. Sometimes nature interfered. During one operation, high winds caught an inflatable tank. The tank, which weighed only 100 pounds, was blown across a field like a balloon. German observers might have been watching. If they saw an inflatable tank tumbling in the wind, the entire deception would be exposed. Soldiers chased the tank and tackled it to the ground. They quickly deflated it and set it up again, secured with additional stakes. Crisis averted. Another close call. During Operation Weissen, a German patrol crossed the Rhine at night. They approached the Ghost Army's fake positions. If they got close enough to touch the inflatable equipment, they'd realize it was fake. Ghost Army soldiers had real weapons. They opened fire on the German patrol from a distance, far enough that the Germans couldn't reach the fake equipment. The Germans retreated, reporting American forces aggressively defending their positions. The deception held, but it was close. The inflatable equipment was fragile. Bullet holes, tears from branches, punctures from being dragged over rough ground. The Ghost Army traveled with repair kits, rubber patches and glue. Soldiers would repair damaged equipment at night, like fixing giant bicycle tires. One inflatable tank was hit by shrapnel during German artillery fire. It deflated in seconds. Soldiers patched it and re-inflated it within an hour. The deception continued. The biggest risk, capture. If a Ghost Army soldier was captured and interrogated, he might reveal the deception. The entire unit's effectiveness would be compromised. 2 Ghost Army soldiers were captured during the war. Both were interrogated. Both stuck to cover stories, claiming they were regular infantry who happened to be near the decoy equipment, but didn't know its purpose. German interrogators suspected the soldiers knew more, but couldn't prove it. Both soldiers survived the war without revealing the Ghost Army's secrets. The Ghost Army wasn't just creating military deceptions. Many members continued creating personal art during downtime. These soldiers included fashion designer Bill Blass, later founded his own fashion empire. Artist Ellsworth Kelly became famous abstract painter. Photographer Art Kane, famous for Great Day in Harlem photograph. Dozens of illustrators, painters, designers who became successful after the war. They sketched, painted, photographed, documented the war through art. Their work provides a unique visual record, not propaganda, but honest artistic responses to war. One Ghost Army artist, Private Harold Dahl, painted watercolors of French villages, German prisoners, battle-damaged churches. His paintings are now in museums, showing World War II through an artist's eyes rather than a photographer's lens. Some Ghost Army members used their theatrical skills to entertain troops. They put on shows, skits, comedy performances. One group created a traveling variety show that performed for other American units. The irony, during the day they deceived the enemy with fake armies. At night they entertained allies with theater and art. When World War II ended in May 1945, the Ghost Army's work ended too, but their story didn't become public. Everything was classified, top secret. The soldiers were ordered never to discuss what they'd done. The equipment was destroyed or locked in warehouses. Documents were sealed. For 40 years, the Ghost Army remained secret. Why the secrecy? Because the tactics worked so well that the US military wanted to use them again in future wars against future enemies. The deception techniques, inflatable equipment, sonic deception, radio manipulation remained classified military capabilities. If potential enemies knew about them, they'd be less effective. In 1996, the Ghost Army's records were finally declassified. 50 years after the war ended, veterans could finally tell their stories. Historians could study the operations. The public could learn about one of World War II's most bizarre and effective units. The revelation shocked military historians. Over 20 major deception operations, thousands of Germans deceived, countless American lives saved, and almost nobody had known it existed. In 2013, a documentary film was released, The Ghost Army. It told the full story, interviewed surviving veterans, showed the equipment, explained the operations. The film revealed that the Ghost Army had conducted over 20 major battlefield deceptions, operated in France, Luxembourg, Belgium, and Germany, impersonated multiple American divisions, saved an estimated 15,000, 30,000 American lives, cost approximately $1.5 million as compared to billions for real equipment. The Ghost Army's techniques became foundation for modern military deception. Today's militaries use inflatable equipment, even more sophisticated than 1940s versions, electronic warfare, radio and radar deception, psychological operations, influencing enemy perceptions, cyber deception, fake digital signatures and communications, all trace back to lessons learned by the Ghost Army. In 2022, the Ghost Army veterans finally received official recognition. The U.S. Congress awarded the Congressional Gold Medal, the highest civilian honor, to the Ghost Army. By 2022, only a handful of Ghost Army veterans were still alive. Most were over 95 years old. They attended the ceremony in wheelchairs, received their medals, and finally got public acknowledgement for their secret war. One veteran, 98-year-old Bernard Bluestein, said, "We waited 77 years to be recognized, but it was worth the wait. What we did mattered. We saved lives. We helped win the war. And we did it with rubber tanks and sound effects. I'm proud of that." Today, Ghost Army equipment is displayed in military museums. The National World War II Museum in New Orleans has an entire exhibit. Visitors can see Original inflatable tanks, sound recording equipment, radio gear, paintings and sketches by Ghost Army artists, photographs of operations. The exhibit is titled The Ghost Army, The Greatest Deception. The art world also celebrates the Ghost Army. Many members became famous artists after the war. Their wartime experience, using art to deceive and save lives, influenced their post-war work. Fashion designer Bill Blass said in a 1990s interview, "The Ghost Army taught me that creativity can solve problems that force cannot. We defeated German divisions with rubber and paint. That lesson stayed with me throughout my career. Sometimes illusion is more powerful than reality." The Ghost Army story is one of World War II's most bizarre chapters. A unit of artists, designers and engineers using inflatable tanks, sound effects and fake radio broadcasts to deceive one of history's most powerful militaries. They conducted over 20 major deceptions, fooled German intelligence repeatedly, saved tens of thousands of American lives, and did it all with equipment that weighed less than a real tank's ammunition. The Ghost Army proved something important. In war, creativity can be as powerful as firepower, deception can be as effective as force, and sometimes the strangest ideas, inflatable tanks and sound effects, are exactly what wins battles. 100 artists went to war. They didn't carry heavy weapons, they carried paintbrushes, audio equipment and inflatable rubber, and they helped defeat Nazi Germany. That's not just bizarre, it's brilliant. The Ghost Army, where art and war combined to create the greatest military deception in history.